All right, welcome back. This is the Morning Brushback. I'm your co-host Dan Blewett, joined here remotely by my Chicago mayor of the future, Bobby Stevens. How are you, sir?
Add co-host of the year to my intro, please.
Well, Bob, we're elapsing, or we're passing through episode 50. I don't know which one is episode 50 because we're recording some of this time and we're not doing them all live at this important junction. So at some point we're missing a big celebration. It's really disappointing. But we have a great guest today, repeat guest. Coach Liam Bowen from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County is here. Liam, how are you?
I'm good. I really appreciate you guys having me on, having me back. I guess the first time, didn't go so bad. So thanks for the return invitation.
Yeah, you're actually one of the most popular shows. There have been a couple that pushed you down the rankings, but you're like number one all time for a while. And then all the madness of Jeff Fry and Richard Skank kind of pushed you off. But you're in the 1,300 views, something like that, which is pretty good. So
I mean, I'll take it, where we can get it. I'm glad people are taking the time to listen. And like I said, just appreciate you guys having me on. And appreciate you guys hanging with me. The reason I'm a little underdressed and not even in my own house, I'm at my in-laws' place up in Pennsylvania. So appreciate you guys squeezing me in.
The vacation show. I just finished
vacation mode.
Yeah, I just finished a slow pitch softball throwing lesson out in DC. So my influence is spreading to different variations of the game. It's very, very interesting. But he's a good dude, hard worker, wants to throw better. Like, whatever, let's do it.
It's like taking a golf lesson, right? Like,
yeah. I mean, if you're playing it and you're serious about it and you want to have more fun, like, yeah. So Liam, what is the state of baseball? Obviously, Division I baseball is is it school back in session yet at UMBC, or where are you guys at?
So we're not back in session. The guys are getting back in about 10 days now. And the vast majority of the classes on campus are remote. So the guys are mostly going to be going to school online. And our guys, they're all due back by the 24th of August. And then they'll go through a period of testing. They're going through a period of self-quarantining right now. And because of, honestly, the unbelievable work that our sports medicine staff has done, we're going to have a chance to get back on the field on August 28th. On September 11th, we'll be back with the whole team. That's our first scrimmage. So I'm thrilled, man. Like, I can't tell you, with that being in that we could do it in the fall. Like, I'm at a point where I just want to see our guys on the field so bad. I'd coach in a spacesuit if they wanted me to. Like, at this point, this is all like, it's all kind of above and beyond, expectations. So we're really grateful for it.
Yeah. Well, if you're in a spacesuit at UMBC's field with that like 30-mile-per-hour jet stream that rolls over the hills, it just like carry you into the forest.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not in playing shape, man. I might be weighing the spacesuit down pretty decent, but whatever it takes is my point. Obviously, like we're just,
for sure.
A lot of people have worked their tail off to get us back on the field. We feel pretty fortunate.
So have you guys talked through like contingencies and what happens if one guy gets it and another guy? I mean, have you kind of gone down that rabbit hole, or is it kind of wait and see still?
There are definitely plans for it. The plan itself allows for some positive tests, and there are measures that are taken if somebody does test positive. Obviously, that's something we want to avoid, for our players' health, for the staff's health, and it would potentially interrupt what we're doing. But it's not a situation where if one person tests positive, the fall is done. I think if we have a full-blown outbreak, obviously that would be a different story, and we're going to work really hard to avoid that. But one positive test, we would still be able to care for that person and, hopefully continue in some fashion after that.
Yeah, man, it's got to be a complex and, like you said, a lot of emotions, like excited to get back, but I'm sure there's just a big underlying anxiety, like, man, I just hope this goes all right, where it just doesn't become like the Major League season. I mean, what's your take so far on the Major League season?
Well, it's great being able to see the best in the world play again. I mean, I think just as a fan, selfishly, that's really good. I think it's a good lesson for our players. I kind of think of it through the prism of our team. I probably stopped. I think we talked about this last time I was on with you guys. Like I kind of stopped being a fan of the major leagues a long time ago. Although like I still love watching them play, and obviously they're great at it. I'm looking at kind of what's happened with just a few guys getting some negative publicity for not complying with the COVID regulations and how it's putting their team and really the whole league and all those guys' livelihoods at risk. And I think about that as, kind of a lesson for our guys that, we didn't ask for this. Like none of our guys, did anything to bring the whole COVID situation upon all of us. But, we got to play the hand that we're dealt. So,
yeah,
it's going to take some positive choices to make this work. And, I think that's being reinforced as you kind of look at what's happening in the MLB.
Are you guys do you have measures and are the kids not allowed to go out to dinner? I mean, what are the restrictions on the players on campus? Are there any, I guess, as far as the athletic department's concerned?
There are. And it's essentially, what we should all be doing. Is kind of the way I put it to the guys. Like what we're trying to do is we're trying to minimize close contact, kind of sharing airspace with people who are outside of our circle, who are outside of the program. So guys aren't going to be able to, go and see a buddy of theirs at another school 3 hours away, one weekend and come back to campus. That's not going to be a possibility. You're not going to be able to have a bunch of people from a bunch of different athletic teams over to your house. Like may have happened in previous years, and it's one of those things. It's not easy. It's not necessarily fair if you want to think about it that way. But to me, I hear from players all the time, like I do anything for my teammates and I love to play baseball. And, this is in my mind, a great chance to show that by complying with some of these things. I feel for the guys. I really do, because college should have some of those social things as a part of it. But, like I said, that's the hand we're dealt. So we're going to play it the best we can. Yeah,
man, this is crazy. It's just hard to wrap your head around how different everything is right now and when it'll actually be better. It's like when, there's like a bell we all get to ring where it's like, you can do normal life stuff again. Like, hey, I don't know. It seems very far away, but then I guess it'll probably just be there. Like one day you'd be like, oh yeah, stuff's normal again. Huh. When did that happen? Right? I don't know.
Fortunately, I did not come on the Morning Brushback to reveal that information. I don't have any of the answers. I'm just, kind of a humble baseball coach who's fortunate that we have some smarter people than me working on some of these like plans and contingencies and the things that keep us safe.
Well, what you did come here for is we're going to talk a little bit about command today, because we've been chatting about that behind the scenes a little bit. So, Liam, this is like the enigma that no one can figure out. What do you feel like? Where does command come from?
That could be a long answer. So I'm going to try and whittle it down.
We'll zig and
a
zag.
Little bit. Yeah, sure. So, and I've thought a lot about this, and I don't want to come on your show acting like, hey, I'm this oracle that has.
No, we want to hear your opinion of command, because everyone has an opinion. We want to hear yours. What?
Well, hold on. If I may interject, if you want to be the #1 watch show, you need to be much more controversial. Like, you need to speak in absolutes, and everybody else is stupid. And I would appreciate if you spoke like that right now.
Yeah, block me on Twitter afterwards.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, guys. There's a reason you're not going to be able to find me on Twitter. That's not really my lane. But the reason I say that I don't have it all figured out is like I was our pitching coach for 8 years, and I became our head coach a little more than a year ago. But I still work with the pitchers, and we had a lot of years where we were tops in the conference for fewest walks and fewest wild pitches and that sort of thing. And then recently, particularly this past year, we weren't as good in that area. So I've kind of spent the summer really thinking hard about this and trying to get us back to where we were and then maybe improve on that. But where does command come from? I think the first thing is there's a requisite amount of athleticism that needs to be, a part of the kind of the situation for any pitcher if he's going to command the baseball. And when I say athleticism, that doesn't mean being explosive. That's two different things. So something that leads a guy to have like a great vertical leap or be great in the weight room or what have you, that's not necessarily the athleticism I'm talking about. I'm talking about the ability to connect different movements in the delivery and then repeat those movements pitch after pitch. I think that, because athleticism takes different forms, I think that form of athleticism is super important. And one of the reasons it's important is because mechanically there are certain positions that are more productive in terms of throwing the ball where you want. So like as an example, like if a guy doesn't like load up and kind of maintain that load on his back leg as he moves forward, it's really hard to get his back leg and center of gravity aligned with the target. And if you don't do that, it's not that you can never throw a strike. It's just going to be harder pitch to pitch. So the guys that can do it easier, they have the athleticism to move their body in more productive ways. And then I think another element, just to rip off a couple more that I think are really important, is timing. I think if you're repeating the timing in your delivery, I think you have a much better chance of being consistent. And I think when we talk about repeating a delivery, what we're really talking about is timing. And then the last one I would say is intention. I think, and I see this more and more, it's just got to be important to you to throw strikes and be competitive in the strike zone. I think we have a lot of young pitchers now that have gotten a lot of affirmation for doing things on the mound that don't have anything to do with command, that I'm not necessarily against. Like, I didn't come on here to do the whole velo versus command debate. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like
it's the worst. It's the worst conversation.
The all-time worst. You want both. Like, I want our guys to throw hard. Like, I'm not coaching our guys to throw soft. That would be really silly. But you still have to have an intention to compete in the zone and to make the way I talk about it is you got to make the scoreboard the scoreboard. Like, the radar gun can't be the scoreboard. The scoreboard has to be the scoreboard. And if you got to be really locked in to winning and losing.
Yeah. Well, let's touch on the first thing. So with the athleticism, but what is like, because I wholeheartedly agree that there's a connection. Like, for example, there are everyone has like teammates and people they knew, like people you've coached, whatever, who you're like, that dude can just like fly or just jump or like whatever. And there is definitely a version of athleticism, which I'm not one of those super athletic people who can like pick up basketball and like do cool stuff. My version of athleticism is that I like can control my body pretty well. Like, I can go to a golf range and like I can make adjustments, even though I don't have any. I've literally never been taught one thing about hitting a golf ball. I can like kind of feel my way around hitting it kind of better. And I feel like that's kind of what you mean. But then the question is, what is that? Because I agree with you that that's like a type of athleticism, but what is it? Like, and if you don't have it, how can you get it? Is it just innate? Like, how do you get to control your body better and repeat better?
It's a really good question. I'm not fully equipped to answer it. There are sports scientists out there who can give you probably a more in-depth and almost like medical answer than me, but it's certainly like a kinesthetic awareness and proprioception. Like it's just understanding how your body's moving in space. That's obviously a big part of it. And this is one thing I will say that might be a little bit controversial. I honestly do believe it's innate. Like, I think the ability to command the ball is the expression of a natural ability rather than something that you can create in somebody. The same way you can't make a slow person fast. I know this as a slow person. I know was never fast, never going to be fast. You can get guys out of their own way if they have the natural ability to connect the delivery and command the baseball, but you can't necessarily grow it in somebody. And that's a little bit humbling as a coach, but I honestly think that's the truth. And that's not to say guys can't get better. Guys can absolutely get better by doing it, like tapping into that ability more. But I don't think you can take a guy who's fundamentally stiff or has a hard time understanding where his body is in space and pump that into him. I honestly don't think that's the case.
Well, then, okay. And I would tend to agree. Bobby, where do you fall on that issue?
So we're talking about like college and above level pitchers right now. Like, how do they get command? Is it more of a level? Well, I have it. I think it's different for youth because some younger kids just don't understand like what they're doing, period. But I think once you get to like high school, is it more of a philosophy? Like, kids are always taught like, oh, the corners are where you want to pitch. The corners are where you want to pitch. And then you watch like Tyler Chatwood, someone that comes to mind in the big leagues who's got a walk problem. Like he walks a lot of guys and he has trouble commanding his fastball. Like, does he have trouble commanding his fastball? Like he doesn't know where it's going? Or is he trying to be too perfect and it's more of like a philosophy thing where you should let that ball work?
Well, I want to cover that. That's a very valid point, but I want to get to that in a minute because I want to stay on this issue. But that's good job. That's a good point.
I'm nothing not full of valid points.
But because there's definitely a strategy thing. I mean, we know this, and we've all had teammates or guys we coach that they're afraid to be in the white of the zone. Like they mentally don't want to be there, and maybe the catcher sets up over there, or the coach calls pitches too far to the corners, and their grouping is just too far off the plate. Like too many of their misses are just, by their random sampling of misses are going to be balls. But I mean, like Liam, I guess the question is, Liam, how far along can you bring a guy then who doesn't have natural command? Like, yeah, Greg Maddux is Greg Maddux, right? Like he's just got an awareness of his body that he can just do things you can't. But at the same time, can you get a guy to the big leagues if he has X amount of, like, what's enough where you can then train it a little bit better and optimize strategy wise and do all that stuff? Well, like, where can it be acceptable, I guess? Is there a line, do you think?
Well, it's different. I mean, I hope this doesn't sound like a cop-out, but it's super different for different guys. Like, I would be personally, and we've started to do this in recruiting. And like I said, this is my current, belief on it. If you catch me in 5 years, maybe experience will have changed me. I'm always open to changing my mind. But right now, for me, the guy that you want to maybe take a chance on in recruiting, who's not a great strike thrower right now, which is maybe what you're talking about, to me is a guy who his delivery is maybe putting him out of alignment with the target, or he's doing something delivery-wise that the best command guys don't necessarily do, but he's clearly a really good athlete and a really free mover, like a guy who doesn't have a lot of movement restrictions. If you find that guy and you say, hey, we'll put him in some constraint drills, we'll get him to understand kind of how his delivery works a little bit better, we'll get him to move a little bit differently, to emphasize some different things, that guy's got a chance to tick up in command, more so than a guy who the delivery's sound, but maybe the body's a little bit rigid and he, for whatever reason, he's just not able to continuously repeat what he's doing. It's kind of the same thing. Like you hear basketball coaches say this. I've actually talked to our basketball coaches about that. The scariest thing is the guy with like pretty jump shot form, but the ball doesn't go in, because you kind of feel like he just doesn't have that feel of the,
that's a good point.
Those small adjustments you need to make. The guy who maybe like, he's kind of got the chicken wing elbow or something going on where you feel like you can fix it. That's the guy you feel like, oh, well, we can get him to make a 15-footer. But the guy who's got Ray Allen's jump shot, but the ball doesn't go in the basket, that's a problem.
That's a good point. Bob, what do you think about that?
That's an interesting analogy, like a pure shooter to a pure strike thrower. Like there's plenty of guys that look great in the mound that just cannot find it. Yeah. Like they throw hard and they're excuse me. I played with a kid actually in the Cape Cod League. I remember vividly because he got drafted in like the 5th round, lefty that was upper 90s, but we could never have him pitch because he could not throw strikes. Like he hit somebody in the head, he threw behind guys, and then he'd come out and 1, 2, 3 strike somebody out, and then he'd go right back to 5 balls just off the backstop. He just had absolutely no idea where the ball was going. But you watch him, and it's like he's tall, he's fluid, the ball just jumps out of his hand. And similar to like the great guy with the great looking jump shot, like he might go on a tear and hit 5 in a row, and then all of a sudden he's hitting them off the backboard, and you're wondering what is going on. It's like he doesn't have – is it like a sixth sense, a sixth tool that you can't teach? Like it's really is a something that might not be teachable. Like they just kids kind of have – or guys kind of have an innate like a presence for throwing strikes or hitting their spots or commanding a ball to where they want it to go, even if they're a little jacked up and maybe how they move.
Sure. No, I think a lot of that's right. I think it can definitely be taught and made better. But once again, it's like accessing a natural ability, which when I started to think about it that way, it started to make more sense to me, where you're talking about trying to get guys to tap into something that they can already do rather than, trying to create something in a guy that doesn't necessarily have it. And to me, one of the things I look for is guys who have big misses, kind of like you're talking about, like the guys who, one pitch is a dot and the next one is like over the umpire's head. That's a guy who's probably, that feel and like proprioception for where his hand is at his release point is probably not great. Right.
Yeah.
Because I think if a guy's got a chance to really command the ball, even if he's in a bad place from a delivery standpoint or a bad place from a strategy standpoint, and is kind of in his own way in some areas, he can still sort of keep it competitive around the mitt. Like once the basketball analogy, like a good shooter doesn't zip it off the backboard. Like it's just not a thing that you generally see.
Yeah,
so
ever usually, like if you're a good shooter, you're not missing, even on your worst day, you're not clanking them off the top of the backboard,
shooting air balls. Yeah.
Well, even even good starters in the big, like there's plenty of good starters that have bad games, but it's not necessarily that they just walk 8 guys in the first inning and they got to get pulled. Like they might just leave it a little bit over the middle of the plate. Like they're not so erratic that it's ugly.
Yeah, and actually one thing, guys, like I said, I've kind of been on a deep dive with this because I was frustrated with, our inability to command it, the way we had in previous years this year. And it's my job to take ownership of that. I lead the team. I lead the pitchers. We weren't good enough. So I've been thinking, long and hard about this stuff. I had a little extra time on my hands. I think we all have, obviously. So I actually went back and I looked up, I forget the number off the top of my head, but the best 50 or so pitchers in 2019 in the big leagues that went to college, not guys who were high school drafts or international signings, but college guys. And I did it. I just ranked them by, I think, WAR, and it was pretty easy to come up with a list of guys, were credible big league starting pitchers. And I went back and I looked up their college walk rate their last year in college to see what it was. And what I would tell you is it's a lot lower than you think. Like there's really not a lot of stories of guys who are like 4 walks per 9. I mean, big league starters after their college career. I think the median was like 2.3, if I have that right. And out of over 50 guys, like there was only there was, you could count on one hand the guys who were over 4 per 9, in terms of a walk rate their last year in college. And that's where I kind of started to get thinking, like, wait a second, this is something that, it's something inside these guys that's a little bit different. That guy who's getting talked about in the first round who's 7 walks per 9, but he's electric. That guy basically almost never turns into a productive big league arm. That's what the history is, as far as I could tell. And
that's interesting.
Just kind of a little side project
that's
for me.
Good research. Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, you wonder how many of these guys who are throwing a pitch rubbernecking to look at the velocity, and you wonder how much that stunts their development of that skill. Like if you're walking 5 per 9 in college, like you said, maybe it never gets better by that point. And then the question is, well, when does it have to be better? Does it have to be better in high school? Like, do guys who go on to play D1 baseball, do they have terrible walk rates in high school and then it doesn't really get that much better in college either? Like, where does it's always going to get a little better, but then as it gets better, the funnel gets narrower, right? And the strike zone gets smaller. So,
well, it's kind of like gambling too, right? Like if he's got a bad walk rate, how electric is the stuff? How good is what he's throwing, to hope that maybe he figures it out, even though this percentages say, just from your amateur research, essentially, that maybe it doesn't. But is he worth taking a flyer on? Because if he does figure it out, then it's going to be so much better than everybody else. I mean, it's tough. It's got to be similar to scouting high school guys, where do you take a gamble on a guy with a huge upside, even though he's probably not showing a lot of command in high school baseball?
Yeah, he would have to kind of fit the parameters I've talked about when it comes to athleticism and maybe, being able to put him in a better position to command the ball better. I will say one thing that I've come to believe coaching pitchers for the last 15 years is we recruit and draft pitchers like command is easy to improve, but stuff is impossible to improve. And I actually think they're both about the same. Like, particularly at this point in 2020, with the ability we have to make guys stuff better, I think there've been a ton of advancements in that area since I started coaching. I could have used them myself back when I was playing, Lord knows. But, in modern times, we really have about an equal number of, assets when it comes to improving guys in those areas. But I think are thinking about, who should get opportunities at the next level is still stuck in the idea that, well, we'll teach them how to pitch, but that stuff is something you can't teach. And I don't just fundamentally don't think that's true. I think both are teachable and both are limited in some ways.
Yeah. It's almost easier to teach stuff now, no? In some aspects?
Yeah, I would say in some aspects. And I would also say, like, if you're talking about a guy, being productive for your team early on, because remember, I'm a college coach. Like, we don't have A ball. Like, a guy can't just go walk the yard in A ball and figure it out down there. Like, he's got to pitch our midweek games, and we want to win those. We need to win those.
Yeah.
So who's going to be productive for you? A guy who can blast the zone with a couple decent pitches, and you wait for him to maybe fill out and get some strength and figure out how to utilize his stuff and throw a little harder and spin it a little better, whatever it is. Or a guy who, is that guy you were talking about in the Cape, who you're kind of watching through your fingers to see if he's going to embarrass somebody or, hit the backstop. So
or hurt somebody, yeah.
Yeah. And I think we still fundamentally undervalue, and you see it in the big leagues now, like it seems like the Indians have a pitching staff full of these guys that were, kind of pitchability, college righties that were really good, and their stuff took a step forward as they got into pro ball, and now they're devastating. And I think that's more a model you're going to see more and more as we go forward.
Yeah, well, you see a guy like, and I haven't watched that much of Shane Bieber, but I was watching some of his 10 punch outs and was first star of the year. And I have not watched much baseball in this nonsensical year, but he just looked completely in control, just bop, 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 just didn't matter. And that, you can't take someone who doesn't have that and give them that. And which is fine. And I don't know if it'd be what his command rates are, what his numbers are. I haven't looked him up, but he seemed in impeccable control of just himself. And it seemed really easy just watching him to just pepper it in the zone. Before he even threw the ball, you're like, oh, that's going where he wants it to go. You know what I mean? But yeah, so one of my friends, Darren Seiler, he's coach at John Carroll High School in Maryland. He's very heavy into the Franz Bosch and the skill acquisition, which God, I hate hearing that term. It just makes me want to punch myself in the face. People put that in their Twitter bio. It's I believe in skill acquisition. It's yeah, I believe in skill acquisition. I learned to wipe my own butt when I was 4. Acquiring skills is awesome. It's great. But
it is a pretty important skill.
But they talk about attractors, right? And attractors is essentially just, I tried to get at Darren. I'm like, Darren, what is an attractor? Darren, is this just a fancy way of saying repeating your delivery? He's like, well, the elbow retractor and this retractor. I'm like, just use real words. And we were kind of saying the same thing overall, but some of the stuff that they're doing, like Franz Bosch and these others, is interesting. They're trying to basically have you complete tasks in unstable situations and do more things to build that fine proprioception, all that stuff. Do you buy into that? Do you find that there's merit there? I mean, are you having guys pirouetting with a water bottle and then throwing a pitch? I mean, is there something there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely something there without question. I think that if you're trying to build facility in throwing and making adjustments, you can't have them only complete one task. You can't have them just stand on the mound 60 feet away and try and beat the mid up. I think what we're talking about when we're talking about command is, hey, I let that pitch leak 6 inches arm side. The next pitch, I want to hold my line a little bit better. You can't do that if you haven't, overcome some different challenges as a thrower. So I definitely think that's the case, just having that facility to make adjustments. I don't think it needs to be crazy elaborate, frankly. I think putting guys into some constraint drills and then to basically vary the target, I think honestly, standard long toss done really properly with a ton of intention and focus is really good for that. If I've got, my buddy at 65 feet and then he moves back to 70 and I still want to hit him, on the glove side hip, then I've got to change the way I'm going to shape my throw into his mitt.
Yeah,
the guys who just, if they just throw Yeah, yeah. If they just throw it back and forth, they're not going to get that. And that's why like that deliberate practice and that focus is super important. So I definitely buy the concept. I wouldn't say we implement it in a, particularly fancy way. I think we do a lot of constraint drills to try and get guys to move more productively. And then I think just bringing a next level type of focus to their work is what gets you there.
Yeah, I see those drills, and obviously many of them are silly looking. Like guys are literally doing like a pirouette spin and then throwing, and they're like jumping up on a thing and then throwing, and then jumping off a thing and throwing. And it's like, and to your point, you wonder how much of that, if you get enough of that just from doing normal looking things like playing sandlot baseball, like throwing a ball from shortstop on the run, like growing up as a young baseball player, like you said, long tossing. Long tossing is a magical thing when you think about it. Like you're progressively getting back to the point where you can hit someone at the chest from 320 feet. Like think of how precise you have to be to throw a ball 300 feet and hit your partner where he's just like this. It's pretty remarkable. That's a really, I mean, if you're off by 2 degrees at 300 feet, it's like 15 feet off course by the time it gets there. Right. And so I think there's something to be said for that too. Outfield arms, like if you have an accurate outfielder, that dude's got some command of the baseball, right? Like those are long throws. For sure. For him to throw it in that, 6-foot grouping or whatever. Or maybe
is it almost too late once they get to that level, Liam? You think like college or even professionally? Like I kind of equate it to learning a language. Like if you start a kindergartner learning a second language, eventually by the time they get to second, third grade, like they probably have a good grasp of that second language and can probably speak it a lot better than maybe say myself, who's 33. If I try to pick up a second language right now, I think it would be incrementally more difficult just because I'm almost so set, like my brain is so set in the ways that it thinks about whatever, in what language I'm thinking and trying to process, speaking a different language. Whereas when they're younger, they pick up, there's so many things that they're just absorbing and learning. So is it better to have them do things like that when they're younger? And how hard do you think it is when you get guys that are 18 years old, almost mature adults, essentially, to try and change them from what they're so used to?
But that's kind of my point, is that aren't they all getting that when they're young? Like they're playing baseball, right? Before you're a pitcher only, you're playing every pitch on every position on the field, and you're throwing.
Not really though, right? Like I know they should be. The answer is they should be, right? Like they should be doing, and they should be on the playground, like doing the monkey bars and stuff like that. But now kids are doing, like they're getting pitching lessons, deep breath, come set. Well, it's not, it really is. It's not necessarily a missing link, but everything is so privatized and specialized.
It's very sterile.
Yeah, you lose all of the creativity that you get when you just go and play. And it's hard to ingrain that back into an adult, even if they understand what you're trying to get them to do. It's like they think about it and they process it in what they've been taught the last 12 years.
I think there's a lot there, definitely a lot there that I agree with. I think teaching guys super specialized mechanics at a young age is the opposite of building facility as a thrower. So I'm not a fan of like pitching lessons for 10-year-olds or anything like that. I'm a fan of those guys trying to be the touch football quarterback, trying to throw one-hand passes in basketball, trying to throw wiffle balls, like just right. Throw different stuff,
like rocks at cars,
different challenges. Yeah, I don't know how you grew up, Dan. We
I was a good kid too, but I wish
the soft stuff.
Yeah. Snowballs.
But I just think building that facility as a thrower at a young age is super important. Building competitiveness in that age is super important. Building a comfort in situations where, winning is in doubt and everybody's trying as hard as they can. I mean, not everybody's comfortable in that situation. So I think you got to build it as a young guy. And then when I don't want to be too pessimistic, guys, on improving command, particularly like with high school and college and even pro players, because although I do think it's a natural ability that you kind of develop as a young person, you're still able to really improve it with these guys because a lot of these guys have not been incentivized to really develop it. So if you have a training program for 14 and 15-year-olds and, they're on the gun all the time, and they're getting a lot of affirmation for throwing hard, they're probably a little bit underdeveloped when it comes to creating timing in their delivery, creating alignment, getting a rhythm signature for every single throw. And you can give them those things, because you can say, hey, we're going to keep developing you to produce more force, but we're also going to do it in like a rhythmic and repeatable way that's going to allow you to apply it to winning and losing in a way that helps our team. So because it's so undertaught, I think you can still really improve it. It's just, you can't take a guy who can't control his body and get him to control his body. There's not a drill for that.
Yeah. Well, do you feel?
I wish I had one, but we don't.
I felt like while Bobby was talking, that it kind of sounds almost like the immune system. Like when you're young, exposing them to lots of different stuff is going to serve them to be better and more adaptive when they're older. Like they can, like for example, how many times as a young player do you throw off like the worst mound you've ever been on? Like every time is like the new worst mound, right? And your mechanics are different, and you have to adjust and like figure out how to throw strikes, right? Today kids also have like a perfect crappy turf mound on these fields, right? And you wonder how much of that helps or hurts them. It's almost like paving the road for them. Like maybe those terrible mounds that we had to pitch with actually made us better strike throwers back in the day.
It's adjustability, right? Like just at an early age, you learn how to move your body. Otherwise, you're going to fail, and you're more receptive to, I guess, adjusting and changing.
It's also a matter of incentives, guys. Like, I think.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, for me, when I was a young pitcher, I wanted to pitch. I loved to pitch. I just wanted to be out there. I wanted to be the guy who got the ball as many times as possible. And to do that, I had to blast the strike zone with multiple pitches. I wasn't a super hard thrower. I never was I gained velocity, but never was like a hard thrower for my level. And I had to just beat it up with multiple speeds. And if I did that and I accomplished that goal, usually that led to success at the level I was playing at, high school and college. If you can change speeds in the strike zone, usually you're pretty effective. You have decent secondary. And I was able to get more opportunities that way. So I was getting what I wanted by doing those things. Now, most guys are pitching in an environment where, a lot of times other than their high school team, their innings are assured because they have to throw a certain number of innings on each of these teams. And the affirmation comes from something other than changing speeds in the strike zone, which to me is like the fundamental skill of pitching. Unless you've got outlier carry, turbo sink, some sort of invisible fastball, which only a few people have, then you need to change speeds in the strike zone. Otherwise, you're just going to get hit a lot. You're going to pitch underneath whatever your velocity number is. It's not going to play that way. I mean, Bobby, I'll ask you. You were a pro hitter. Like if a guy's going to throw you a vanilla 95 and you can load up for it, like at a certain point, if you have enough natural bat speed and ability to turn the bat fast enough, it's not crazy difficult.
It's not. And you're right.
I think, I think we just see that a lot. We see a lot of guys where it's like, oh, geez, like this guy throws 96 and he can't miss a barrel. It's like, well, if you're not getting guys to respect, another pitch in the strike zone, then that's how the sport works, I think.
Yeah, it's comparable to a lot of things too. Like the first time you drive on the highway, if you've never gone 70, 75 miles an hour in a car, like you're pretty nervous, and then you do it a dozen times, and all of a sudden it's just natural. Same thing with hitting fastballs.
Get back to texting while driving. It's like this
absolutely
is good.
Texting, car karaoke, do whatever you need to do in the car. But same thing like you said, if you see 90 to 95, consistently and it's straight, you're gonna either, especially at that level, at the high college and professional level, you're either gonna barrel it and continue to be successful, or you're going to be out. You're going to be done playing, essentially, because you need to be able to do that. And most guys at that level have the bat speed to do that. It's when you throw a wrinkle in, like, okay, the ball is 92, but it moves 6 inches, or it's 98 and you don't see that as often. So now it's something to adjust for. It's definitely, if you know what's coming, similar like the Astros, like, when you know what's coming, you can plan for it. It's a lot easier than when you're playing a little bit of a guessing game.
Well, Liam, along those lines of needing to throw strikes. Do you feel like guys who have exceptional velocity when they're young essentially are de-incentivized to ever learn command? Like if you're Hunter Green, for example, who I think is doing well in the minor leagues, right? Isn't he maybe up with the Reds now? But that dude threw 100 when he was in high school. Who needs to command the zone? You just got to throw it over the middle of the plate when you throw that hard, right? And of course, you only have to throw 100 in high school to be. If you throw 88, you can do a lot of stuff without having to be actually good at pitching. Do you feel like that de-incentivizes you? Like you miss a critical window where you would otherwise have to like bear down and learn to pitch?
I think there could be something to that. I also think sometimes it's harder for those guys in a way because they get so little contact, like they get so little, like so few quick outs. And a lot of times hitters are sort of in take mode, like the bottom end of a high school order against a guy throwing 91 is not usually swinging super aggressively.
Yeah.
That they don't have maybe some of the same leeway that other guys have. So, that's, that maybe goes back to kind of the strategy point that you were talking about earlier, that there's like a strategic element to command as well. And then I think sometimes you can have a guy whose walk numbers are a little inflated if he's got really high velo for his level, but he actually does have the ability to command the ball. He just never gets like an 0-0 ground out on a ball that's like a ball below the strike zone because it's a take every single time.
Yeah.
And whereas a guy throwing, 85, a guy might chase it, just knock it into the ground and save him some pitches. I do think there's something going on there. But at the same time, I think like what you said, what you say is right. Like if it's not emphasized, if at the end of the day, if the player doesn't have the intention to do it, it's going to be tough for him to learn it. That's about as simple as it gets.
Well, and there's also no good reason. Like if I threw 92 in high school, there would never be a reason that I had to throw it on the corner of the plate. Like there's just never a situation where I have to bear down and throw it there because I feel like I'm going to get hurt. Like that's just not a thing when you throw that hard. Like outer half, maybe, right? Like, I don't know. But do you remember Tim Lincecum when he came up? They were talking about his walk rate. Like they were nervous about it. And people said, no, his walk rate, which was kind of high for college. I don't know if it was like 5 per 9 innings. It was like a little, I don't know what's average for, what do you think's average for D1 baseball? 3 per 9, Liam? Where do you put it?
In our league, it's 4.5. And I think
that makes sense. Because it's 3 in the big leagues, I think.
Yeah, maybe closer to 5 nationally. It's actually increased the last few years, which I think is a function of some of the, the changes in the game and the, how players come to our level that we've kind of been alluding to. Yeah. I mean, well, honestly, baseball's hard. Like I'm not trying to sit here and tell you this, like this stuff is easy, man. Like, the guys in the stand saying just throw strikes, like they don't have any idea how hard it is. And it's like any, we're a Division I school. We're looking for people who are outliers. Like we're looking for people who have like an outlier amount of body control. Most people, even fairly explosive athletes, can't control their body the way we need them to. So that's, at the end of the day, that's what makes it an elite unit, right? Like you can't take everybody. That's kind of what the word means.
So just to jump back into Lincecum, he, over the course of his career, he was a 3.6 walk per 9, a 9.3 strikeout per 9.
Do you know what he was in college? Can you pull up his college numbers? Because basically the sentiment with Lincecum was that he was walking a lot of guys in college because his delivery was so unorthodox, and he was throwing like 97. And they're like, look, these dudes just like have no idea what to do, and they're just taking and taking and taking. And in pro ball, guys are going to swing a lot more. They're going to put the ball in play. They're going to be better at putting him in play. Whereas there's just guys in college that had no shot of actually hitting Lincecum's curveball or 96 coming out of their, his back pocket. But in pro ball, guys can actually put the ball in play, so his strikeout rates, they assume, would come down. And guys would just put the ball in play, and so now it's not 3-2 every time he pitches to every hitter. So what was his college walk rate? Do you know?
I'm looking for right now. It was, so in 04, it was 6.57. In 05, it was 6.12. In 06, the year he got drafted, it was 4.52. But then when as soon as he got into the minor leagues, it was 3.9, 3.19, and then his first year in the big leagues was 4. So it definitely dropped dramatically. But you're also talking about the guy that struck out 14 guys a game, 14 per 9, 15 per 9 in his in his A-ball season. I mean, he's not used to the ball being put in play ever. It's walk, strikeout, walk, strikeout.
Yeah, outlier stuff. You know, it can be harder at lower levels for those guys to express their command. But I think one thing you saw that was important was the drop in the walk rate in college. I mean, I think that's got to get noticed. You know, he didn't leave college like 6.5.
Yeah,
and he was a guy I remember. I'm old enough to remember his heyday in the big leagues. Like, he wasn't a precision instrument. You know, it wasn't like watching Shane Bieber pitch, but at the same time, he wasn't buck wild. Like I don't remember a ton of big misses. And like you say, Dan, a guy like that with ridiculous stuff who's around the plate, you know, he's going to be successful. It's like anything in our sports, a sliding scale. You know, if you have outlier stuff and you get a ton of swings and misses, you get a little bit more leeway on the command side. You know, if you throw, you know, a pretty, you know, middle of the road 92 and have kind of an average breaking ball, then you got to keyhole it. You know, it's kind of different for different guys.
Is he what you guys would consider the prototypical effectively wild pitcher in the big leagues? Like, if there was an effectively wild guy in the big leagues, would Tim Lincecum be that guy? I know he's not wild, but you still have to feel like at any point he could walk you on 4 straight or strike you out in 3 straight.
Yeah, effectively wild's a funny term. I'm glad you brought it up, Bobby. I think when guys are effectively wild, they're actually much less wild than people think. Like, I think there are a lot of people who are pitching who are trying to hang on to the effectively wild label when they're really just wild. You know, I think
that's a good point.
Effectively wild to me means kind of just what you said, a guy who's got incredible swing and miss stuff that he can get away with, an extra walk or 2 per 9 innings. Those guys absolutely exist. I think the 2 things, the bar for what level of stuff that is higher than people think. Like, even at our level, you know, a guy will be 89, 92 and say, well, you know, he's a good velo guy. He's maybe effectively wild. It's like, well, 89, 92 isn't going to get enough swings and misses unless it comes with just a best in the league type of secondary pitch.
Yeah.
You know, like that's just not fast enough. 98, 99 might be fast enough, but the bar is really much higher than people think. And then the bar for wild is lower than people think. You know, like,
so would you consider effectively wild maybe more of an attitude, like a guy who's got a little bit of an edge where if you piss him off, like a Nolan Ryan, he might just throw one at your back just because? Like, he makes you, because that's what as a hitter, a guy that's effectively wild is someone that makes you a little bit uncomfortable in the box because he might actually just throw at you, or he might miss and it will hit you just because he doesn't either command it or he's that big of a jerk where he's just going to be like, well, I don't like this guy as much. Here's one up and in. Because that's, as a hitter, that's how I perceive effectively wild, like a little bit of nervousness in that at bat.
Sure. Well, you know, different pitchers have different intentions, right? Like, you know, the guys we're talking about, Ryan, Lincecum, they're trying to get you out with stuff. All right. People I think sometimes when they watch those guys or think about them, they think they're all over the place. They're really not. But their intention is to beat you with their stuff rather than beat you with like precision command. And because they're trying to beat you with their stuff, and they're not necessarily as, you know, worried about keeping it around the mitt, like as a hitter, you know, that's got to be a little bit more uncomfortable. Whereas, you know, maybe I'm thinking about some guys kind of there's fewer of them now, but maybe back when, you know, I was playing, there were, you know, guys in the league. I'm thinking of like, you know, Jeff Suppan, Joe Blanton, like guys who are kind of that kind of everyday, like 3rd, 4th, 5th starter who they're trying to beat you by moving the ball around the zone. It's probably a little bit more comfortable as a hitter, but they can also maybe pitch to your weakness a little bit more. So to me, it's a little bit stylistic is, you know, kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah. We touched on just essentially fear as a hitter and what role fear plays as being a hitter and how it plays a little bit more of a role. Obviously, if the guy's throwing a lot harder, and you see it in younger players, especially, like you face a kid who's throwing unusually hard for his age, most of the kids on the bench are a little bit nervous, even if they're not saying it out loud. Some of them are almost, you know, some of them are noticeably nervous and they let you know it and they're probably in tears. even when the pitch isn't coming anywhere near him. But it happens in pro ball too. As probably good as Aroldis Chapman is, 105 is still 105, and if he's feels like you disrespected him, it could be 105 up at your chin, and that's a little unnerving.
Dude, Randy Johnson, how did anyone ever get in the box against that man? Just terrifying. Watching him pitch is unreal. Like, I watched a throwback game of him on YouTube like a couple months ago, and I was like, how did anyone do this? Like, how did anyone ever do this? And he had good command.
But essentially with 2 pitches, slider, fastball. Like, he's not mixing in.
What else could he throw, and what else would he need to throw?
But he's not mixing in. He's a starter, so usually a starter's got a 3-pitch mix or 4-pitch mix. I mean, he's basically closer type mentality for 9 innings.
Well, he threw fear, fastballs, and sliders. Those 3 things: fear, fastballs, and sliders.
3 pitches. He had 3 pitches for sure.
No, I think the thing that you can learn from guys like Randy Johnson, or like really, for big parts of their career, guys like Kurt Schilling and Roger Clemens were really 2-pitch guys. It was like fastball split, like a once in a while get me over curveball. Yeah. But there's more guys who are elite pitchers at the highest level with really just a couple pitches. But what's always the case with those guys is they're not beating themselves. They're guys that are blowing up the zone for the most part, and the 2 pitches are lookalikes. If a guy has upper echelon velocity and can throw a lookalike secondary pitch that he can put in and out of the strike zone, that kind of checks all the boxes right there. Like, yeah, it's nice to, maybe spice it up every once in a while, but there's really no answer for a hitter other than guessing right, if that's the case. I'll defer to you, Bobby, but like the guys who have like true lookalike secondary, those are the guys who, when they combine those pitches, it takes both of them to another level. And on our, we don't have, peak Randy Johnson on our team. Nobody does. But we try and do that with our guys. If you got a guy who's 88 and he can move it around the zone, if you give him something that goes 78 to 81, but looks like the 88, whether it's a cutter, changeup, whatever, little slider, it could be a lot of things. Like, that guy's going to pitch above his stuff. He's going to be that guy where maybe the less initiated look at him and say, well, how's he getting so many people out? He's only 88. Well, you can't, it's hard to be on time for 88 if it can be 78 whenever he wants.
Yeah.
And really like difficult. You said, especially if it looks the same. I remember facing a closer who was fastball split with York in the Atlantic League, but he was tipping his split all the time. He'd tip his split, and we all knew it. So we'd had that, and he wasn't very effective against us because you basically knew when you could spit on the splitter, because he's not throwing it for a strike, but it looks exactly like his fastball, and it just dives right out of the zone. It's not a pitch he throws for a strike. He doesn't want to throw it for a strike. He wants to swing and miss. So when guys like that just they don't tip, they have no tell on their pitches, and they're just, like you said, 88 and then 78 look exactly the same. It's the most frustrating at bat, because you should be able to hit 88 as a hitter. You're in your mind, you're like, this is something I should tee off on. And it's like Kyle Hendricks. Just got to be the most frustrating games when he cruises through 6-7 innings with 1 hit, and he's barely breaking a pane of glass.
I'm really glad you mentioned him, and I thought you might, because I know you're a Chicago guy, but I actually did something with our pitchers one year. I think it was 2018, where it was partway through the year, and I looked at the numbers, and you can, it's all online now. You can break it down by zone, and fastballs in the dead center of the zone. So like the, middle third, both up and down and left and right. Fastballs in the dead center of the zone. Guys were hitting something like 260 off Kyle Hendricks, which you think that's like impossible, because he's, it's a well below average fastball. It doesn't have a lot of velocity. And I even showed the guys like a video of one of them. It was like a 2-1 count, and a guy just like fouls off the fastball, a little bit oppo side to the backstop. And it's like, well, why is this happening? Like if a guy from our level went out there and pitched against this guy at 88, he would take him out of the stadium. But Kyle Hendricks is getting away with this pitch, and the reason is obvious. It's the changeup. Like, he has to respect the changeup. You can throw it in any count, and it's a lookalike pitch.
You're basically you're banking on a pitch. Like you're sitting change up the whole time, and hopefully he doesn't throw you 3 straight fastballs and just sits you right down. It's a chess game. He's playing chess where he's not throwing, he's not relying on power. And those guys are tough to hit against, especially at that level when you're basically going up against 90% guys that have power stuff where they got there because they throw plus pitches, and he's throwing average pitches that will go to all parts of the plate and at all speeds, and he's just frustrating. I can only imagine just being in the box and just coming back to the dugout angry after a ground out.
Right. But I think one thing that I think we can all be a little bit more diligent about is if you have a plus changeup that you throw in any count, none of your pitches are average. Because like if I can throw you a plus changeup any count, then my fastball is above average. Like you're not going to react to it like an average fastball. It doesn't really matter how fast it's going. It's an above average fastball. Like if I've got my changeup fades arm side and I've got like a little cutter slider that can go the other way, but they look the same. Like it doesn't matter how you evaluate that pitch in isolation. That pitch will be above average. Mark Burley's cutter was way above average because his changeup was.
What a frustrating guy that must have been. Because he's not even trying to throw it past you. He wants you to just hit it off the end and ground out in one pitch. And you do. And it's so frustrating. It's like I'm sitting here like I'm frustrated. I'm not even hitting right now. It's just a frustrating thing.
Yeah, I had a scout tell me one time, a scout that I respect and I think is a really smart baseball guy, tell me, Cliff Lee doesn't have 1+ pitch. This is when Cliff Lee was like, starting the year with like 50 Ks and 3 walks. Yeah, something absurd. And to me, that's not a condemnation of Cliff Lee. That's a condemnation of how we evaluate pitchers, because we evaluate the pitches in a vacuum. That's not how the hitter perceives them. The hitter perceives them in relation to each other, and to me, all of Cliff Lee's pitches are functionally plus because the hitter has to respect all the other ones. And we just never get to that part of the conversation when we evaluate young pitchers. We always evaluate the pitches in isolation, and that's why we don't understand certain guys. We don't understand why certain guys are getting banged, and we don't understand why certain guys are super effective. And it's because we just, truthfully, we just don't know what we're looking at. If I'm being real blunt.
Well, the room for error too. I mean, Dan, you threw it. Dan, you were a hard thrower. I mean, the room for error when you throw mid to upper 90s is a lot different than the room for error when you throw upper 80s to low 90s. It's just you can miss a little more because the reaction time for the hitter is a little bit less, and so now you're talking about guys like Kyle Hendricks and Cliff Lee who apparently don't have, according to some observers, any plus pitches, but you have almost less room for error as a hitter because everything looks exactly the same. So you need to either recognize it or guess perfectly, or you're out. And I almost rather face the guy who's trying to blow it past me, because at least I know I'm going to get something hard. I got to react quick. And what I see is probably what I'm getting. Like I'm going to recognize it a little bit earlier as a hitter anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, we talk about it all the time with our guys, and the way I explain it to them, just try and keep it as simple and streamlined as possible, is either every pitch you throw either needs to be an absolute outlier or look like all your other pitches. There's no profit being in between those things. So it either needs to be Clayton Kershaw's curveball, which everybody in the stadium knows it's going to climb up out of his hand, but it's just so different than any other curveball the hitter is facing on a day-to-day basis that it's still hard to hit, or you have to make the pitches look like each other, because essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to create margin for error, because like we've been talking about, command's really hard. It's hard to be so precise over and over and over again. And the way to create that margin of error is either to be blessed with that kind of dynamic stuff, or have created that kind of dynamic stuff through a ton of work and accessing some natural ability there, or by creating deception on your pitches and making them look like each other and being good enough at repeating your delivery that you can give the hitter the same look every time. And I think what you have to do as a coach, and what a pitcher has to do with himself, is guy's got to look himself in the mirror and say, well, where do I have more ability? Do I have an honest chance to create outlier stuff? And I can just tell you personally, like I think we have a lot of tools to get guys to throw harder and have better stuff. 95 was never going to come out of me as a player. I don't care what you did. I just wasn't explosive enough. So if I want to keep playing, I want to keep helping my team, I got to maybe go the command route. A guy who's maybe a little bit springier, he's got longer levers, he's got some, maybe a little bit more juice in the tank. He can look himself in the mirror and say, well, I have a chance to be an outlier. I got to kind of go down that road. And that's why coaching each guy is really individual.
It's fun to watch guys like Kyle Hendricks pitch as someone who's not in the batter's box, or if he's on my team, because you just watch the frustration that he creates. And it seems like he shouldn't be that good, but no, he's better than good. He is an unbelievably good player and pitcher, and he's just using everything he has to make it so uncomfortable for you as a hitter that it's fun to watch. And it's also fun to watch guys that throw hard. Now that the emphasis on throwing hard is more than emphasis on command, because you're going to get more opportunities with more, I guess, raw talent with stuff, quote unquote stuff, than you would if you were a master craftsman with your pitches and your pitch selection. But I find it much more fun to watch a guy that can just pitch circles around hitters, as opposed to a guy who can maybe just throw 100 and those guys get hit around if they can't command it or if they've got no secondary stuff. So it's fun to watch a guy like Burley or Hendricks just roll through a game, not to mention the speed at which they pitch, which is also very nice as a position guy.
Well, the problem is
for sure. And no, go ahead, bud.
Is that when you
throw
hard?
I think I'm on a delay. My bad.
Yeah, there is a little bit of a delay. The problem I think with a lot of younger players is they think that humping up, like they throw 90, 92, and they want to reach back and throw 93. It's not a meaningful difference, and they're better off just like relaxing and throwing 91 on the black if they can, rather than reaching back for 93 that then goes over the middle of a plate. That's where it always ends up going when you try to overthrow. And that's not a meaningful difference. And it's the same thing with guys training for velocity. Like, I'm on the road to 95, which is like the most tired thing. It's like just such a tired thing. But, it's like, all right, well, how hard do you need to throw? And if you can't jump an entire bracket of velocity, then there's no point in spending your entire offseason trying to go from 92 to 94. Going from 92 to 94 will not change you as a pitcher. You'll get away with like another couple pitches per game, but you can't pitch differently. If you go from 92 to 97, sure, now you can pitch completely different. But guys don't make that jump once they're that old. Not really. Like once in a while, like guys will go 2 miles per hour, and then they think they can pitch different, and now they're completely obsessed with how hard it goes, and now they're throwing junky 94 center cut instead of 92 that's well located, because like Liam, you said, and this is what I want to get into, is that intention to throw strikes. Like I really want the ball to go where I need it to go.
Do you think you see more out of like velocity jump out of guys that are starters that can just jump in the bullpen and blow it out for an inning, as opposed to a guy who's like works at trying to throw harder and trying to get to that bracket? Does that make sense? Like the guy who's 90, 92 as a starter, but who's never had the opportunity to just warm up and blow it out for 15 pitches as a relief guy who's might be 95, 96.
What's your question?
Do you think you have a better opportunity as a guy who's a starter who's got middle of the road velocity at the pro level to make that jump to the next bracket if he becomes a reliever, or if he tries to be tries to do more arm care velocity stuff?
I don't know, Liam. What do you think?
I don't know if you have any backstory.
I think you can definitely turn up the intent and the tempo in guys' deliveries, and you will get them to throw harder a lot of the time, I would say. Sometimes guys they kind of get to a point where they're moving so fast they can't still move efficiently, and they don't get the same kind of return on investment there. You can definitely turn them up and have them throw a little bit harder. I would say in my coaching experience, more times than not. The question is, to me, how do we get the most outs? Like, we play 3-game series in Division I like everybody else. And if our game 1 starter throws 95 pitches and gets 11 outs, that's a train wreck. Like that has a domino effect for our entire team. That's really negative, and I would say, and I'm going to speak in generalities, and I know that command and velocity are not oppositional. I do not want to talk about them that way, but I would say, generally speaking, a delivery that's really high effort, it can be harder to regulate than a delivery that's much lower effort. I believe this.
I think they are a little oppositional, personally. I don't mind getting into that fight, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I would like. I think it's a little bit more complicated than velo and command being oppositional. I think you only have so much intention to spend, and if you spend all the intention on trying to throw hard, then yes, it will impact your command. Because you can't double your intentions. But the thing for me is, like, at the end of the day, like, if you want to be valuable, you have to clock outs. Like, you have to be a guy that can roll through lineups. Like, it's not to say relievers aren't valuable, but to me, they're in a different category than a guy that can turn a lineup over. Like, a guy that can turn a lineup over 2 and 3 times at our level is an absolute piece of gold. And a guy that can come in and get you 3 outs really helps, but it's not the same. And to me, if I'm coaching a guy and it's like, hey, look, we can redline your delivery and you might bump a 95, and that will be really cool. But you can kind of pitch at that maybe 90 to 95% effort level instead of, hitting the pedal on the floor every single time. And you can get a ton of outs for us by, being firm enough to put pressure on the hitter, but also manipulate them with secondary and location. Like, that's an easy call for me in terms of value to our team and, what that guy's going to accomplish in his career.
Well, it's a part of us, like a scout's, notes too. Is a guy max effort and what he does, or is it an easy 90, 92? Or if he's a max effort 92, like this, he's giving everything he's got. Maybe he's got good command like that. Maybe his command is okay, but a guy that's easy, it's like, from a projectability standpoint, I think scouts look at that and like, okay, there might be some more in there. His command, like we can work with his command because he's not max effort. So maybe it's just something like he's cutting himself off. Maybe it's something more mechanical. Because you see it with hitters too, like guys that are max effort swings. It's like it's hard to corral them back into like a 95% so they get more barrels. Just if I can relate it to hitting, like if you're max effort, it's hard to bring them back down to something more controllable and get them to at least buy in. Like, hey, the ball's going to go just as far. 5 feet over the fence is just as good as 50 feet over the fence. I need you to catch a barrel more. Same thing with a pitcher. Like, I need you to be in the zone more, even if that means 90 instead of 93.
Well, and I don't think it's actually dialing back. I think it's getting mentally absorbed in the task, because at least from
like a buy-in.
Yeah, well, like from my own experience, and I'm sure this is hitting too, when I was like completely focused on A, throwing the piss out of the ball, which I always was, but B, this ball absolutely has to either hit the black or it has to be in. Like, I'm going to miss in on this guy. When I'm like completely absorbed at like seeing, and everything in my being is getting this ball in on this guy, then you're not thinking about your effort level. And then you're just competing, and then the ball comes out at the speed and you throw it at the intensity that you do it. Like, intensity takes care of itself. But when you're consciously trying to throw this ball as 95, then there's nothing left. It's like what Liam said. Like, I use the analogy of like your computer memory. Like, if you're just a computer, if you're spending all of your memory, your RAM, on how hard can I throw this, there's nothing left to focus on a task, which is hitting your spot or whatever. But when you're so engrossed in hitting the spot, the other stuff can just like come along for the ride too. Is that how you kind of would think of it, Liam? Or?
No, I think that's perfect, Dan. I mean, I think that's a big part of it, is being bought into, executing the task that's in front of you. And that's kind of goes back to what I said at the beginning. You got to make the scoreboard. Yeah. That's a big part of it. I will say it's also about application of effort, right? Like, when you apply it, if we want to get in the nitty gritty of the pitching delivery, like, I think the guys that are doing what you're talking about, where they're taking all of their intention and they're putting it on trying to throw the ball, with a lot of velocity and not as much focus on execution, you're going to see a lot of effort early on in the delivery. Whereas the guys who their intention is to get aligned with their target and then let it rip, you're going to see the effort applied when the front foot gets down.
Yeah.
Which, somebody told me a long time ago, you can't throw with one foot in the air. It's impossible. Like, you got to get both feet down. And then like when our guys get both feet down, I want them to cut it loose. Like, I don't think it works, trying to, drive the car with the governor on.
I agree.
Like, I think you need to, when that front foot's down, you need to absolutely let the whip crack. But when I'm talking about being maybe a little bit lower effort, I'm talking about letting the velocity kind of build as the delivery goes along, not getting out ahead of yourself, and trying to almost turn it into like the Olympic javelin or something like that.
I completely agree. And you see that with young pitchers. When they try to throw harder, they try to throw hard early. And then the ball just goes up. And you can see it. You can see them trying to do it. Whereas you're right, it's very tough to be, I'm going to throw the crap out of this ball. You're relaxed, and then boom, like you said, you crack the whip at the end. It's hard to do that, because when you're excited and you're about to it's hard to not do that early, just to then calm back down and then hit the gas late. It's hard to do that.
You can't throw the ball with 1 foot in the air. Challenge accepted.
That sounds like a Roger Miller song.
Well, maybe not.
Can't roller skate in a buffalo herd. You can't throw a baseball with a foot in the air.
I will say you can throw with 1 foot in the air. It's just not going to go all that well.
Challenge accepted, sir.
It's you shoot me the video, Bobby. We'll maybe grade out the velo on that without getting the front foot down. But no, I think you guys bring up a lot of good points. That probably the fundamental thing is your intention. Like what you're really trying to accomplish, and I think that's expressed in the way that you move. Like, I've watched a lot of guys pitch a baseball in my time, and I can look at a guy and say, this guy is living or dying with getting this pitch to be where he needs it to be, versus this guy doesn't have a lot of clarity in his process. He's and that's where you can help a guy. You talk about making command better. I think a lot of it is just beating that divisional mindset. If a guy's trying to do two things, I think there's always, those are the guys who tend to beat themselves, is what I would say.
Yeah, I would agree. It's like the guys who are really good strike throwers are just very absorbed in the channel that's going to take their ball where it needs to go. And the guys who are obsessed with velocity are out there just kind of like in their own separate little world, completely outside of that. So, Liam, what do you guys do to try to foster this? Because I know a lot of the stuff we talk about is unfortunate in the sense that if a dad's at home and he's like, well, what do I do with little Johnny to help him be better at baseball? You're like,
yeah, I should have brought this up earlier. Some of the strategies you have for guys commanding the ball. I think you can kind of put them into three categories. I think the first is getting guys into like productive constraint drills. And that's some of the stuff you were talking about with Coach Seiler, like where you're basically almost giving the guys a throwing challenge that promotes the movements that you want. So if a guy lands really heavy on his front foot, kind of gets his upper body moving forward too early in the delivery, maybe you're going to have him, jump back and then make a throw as part of his warm up. We basically tailor each guy's warm up to the constraint drills that are going to get them moving in the way that we're hoping for them to move. So I think that's one of them. I think a gigantic one that is wildly under-taught is rhythm and timing. I think every single throw our pitchers make needs to have a timing signature where like literally a cadence that they can count out, 1, 2, 3, throw, whatever it is. And I think there needs to be elements in the way that they move that they can put onto that timing. So what I mean by that is if you and me are playing catch, Dan, and I'm, shuffling and throwing you the ball, we're just doing our throwing progression in the outfield, the way my hands move on every throw, it should be in sync with maybe my front knee, and it should be on that cadence that I have. And I need to be able to fall out of bed and repeat that cadence. I'll tell you right now, to this day, I haven't thrown competitively in a long time, but if I throw 2 balls in a row in BP, you can watch my mouth and you'll see my lips move, counting out that cadence. I'm not trying to throw 3 balls in a row in BP. Yeah. That's no good. So I
appreciate the heck out of that.
I tell guys that, I don't claim a lot. I I try hard as a husband and a father. I'm an honest guy, and I throw a lot of strikes in BP. Those are kind of the boxes. Past that, everything else is
absolutes. This is the absolutes of life right there.
I don't know. I don't want to claim too much else, but those things I can.
What if that's the difference that gets you through the pearly gates? They're like, man, you're on the fence, but impeccable BP, man. Come on in, get yourself a cloud.
Some questionable life choices, but man, your batting practice plays up here. Get in. Come on in.
That's a religion that maybe I could sign up for. But
Joe Boo, that's where Joe Boo is waiting to greet you.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Hey, you got to set a tone, but the just having a timing to every single throw, like to me, if the feet are moving at a different signature, that's a problem. When a guy's in a windup, if he's not using his step back and the pivot with his feet to establish a tempo in his delivery, I think that's generally a problem. You see some big league guys who can play around with that. And I think we've had guys who have gotten to a point where as long as they got to the top of their leg lift, they could do it a number of different ways. But once they broke their hands, their timing was so good that they could give the hitter different looks. Anybody who's struggling at all to command the baseball, I think that's really tough. And you just got to give them a single timing for every throw they make. And then the last thing is ball flight, right? You got to understand your ball flight. You got to get to the same spot at release. And if let's say I'm a two-seam guy, I'm trying to sink the baseball. Once again, I'm playing catch with Dan. Like when as he's moving back, I've got to get the ball the same shape. It's gonna change by distance, but that ball's gonna have the same shape. And like if it's a two-seam guy and Dan's right-handed, I would want his mitt like backhand like opened up so that ball could go straight in it. If you understand what I'm saying, I want to visualize the ball's shape every time, because when I get on the mound, locating that two-seamer is all about where I started and knowing that the movement's going to take it to the spot. Our players have heard me say literally hundreds of times, it's a paper airplane with a bent nose. You got to start it in the right spot and know that the ball flight's going to be something you can predict. If the ball flight's unpredictable, then Greg Maddux can't command it. Like nobody can command that.
Right.
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because my last season when my shoulder was like killing me and I was like frantically trying to find ways to get people out because the way I always pitched wasn't working because my stuff like wasn't the same. I started throwing a two-seamer on advice of, I was crowdsourcing, and it was perplexing. I remember like the first couple that I threw where I released the pitch, and of course me throwing all four-seamers like the 5 years prior to that, I released a pitch, and like as it left my fingers, I like knew it was a strike at the bottom of the zone, and then it was a ball hitting the dirt right at the catcher's mitt. And I was like, no, that's a strike. Wait, I was like confused because I knew like the way it came off my hands and the trajectory that it was supposed to be a strike. But because it was now a sinker or two-seamer instead of a four-seamer that would have like risen up and stayed at the bottom, it was a ball. And then I did it again, and it was the same exact thing. And I was like, what? No, I'm not supposed to be 2 and I should be 0-2 right now, or he should have grounded out. Like, this doesn't make sense. And it was honestly such a strange feeling because I knew I threw a strike and yet it was a ball. So yeah, understanding, like you have to, at that point, I was like, what do I do? I have to like throw this sinker like at the mid thigh. Like I didn't even have to think about what I would do prior, but now it's like I had to retarget everything, and it was strange, and it was kind of like I felt very lost. So anyway,
Dan making himself go insane in real time pro ball career.
Where I've seen that hitter,
it's like a hitter that sees a great pitch and he just fouls it straight back, and it's like,
yeah, you're like, wait, what? I hit home run on that. I hit home run. That not home run?
I barrel ball now, and then you swing and miss, and that's just you're just fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah, I was going to say where I've seen that be a real challenge for young pitchers is changeups. Because guys just always cite their changeups at the bottom of the zone. It always falls out of the bottom of the zone. If the hitter sees anything where it turns over at all, it's just a take. I've had to coach so many guys over the years that, hey, you have to try and throw the changeup at the mask, which feels uncomfortable because it's like, wait a second, I'm going to throw the ball slower than I can throw it, higher than I want it to be. Like that's where it comes back to understanding your ball flight and buying into what you need to buy into to be a real competitor. So like, and that's where guys, like for a guy to have a plus changeup at our level, he has to have the conviction usually, because it's usually going to have more depth than the fastball. He's got to have the conviction to throw it, at the neck guard or the mask. And that's a separator. There's a lot of guys in Division I baseball that have, like, you watch them in the A pitch and be like, man, it's pretty good changeup, like good arm speed. It's got, like good movement, good separation from the fastball. And it's a total non-factor because they just never throw it in the zone because they don't have the conviction to throw it high enough.
Yeah, a little nervous to throw it. I feel like that's the Achilles heel of a lot of kids when they have a changeup.
Yeah,
just they're scared to throw it. They don't trust it as much, and it's like, just don't worry about that it's slower. Don't worry that it's slower than a fastball. Like, it doesn't. That's the point. Throw it, trust it, just let it go. Throw it again, trust it. They trust things that they can throw at full speed, or that goes at a speed that they're comfortable throwing. I feel like, at least for younger guys that I see.
I remember my first college changeup that I threw, that I got a swing and miss on. I vividly remember it because I taught myself that pitch in the winter, and then I threw it in the game, and I watched it go straight, like dead straight, right for the middle of the strike zone, and I was like starting to like hide as it was mid-flight, and then the dude whiffed, and I was like, whoa, it was like wild, because I'd never thrown a competitive changeup before that day. I didn't throw one as a kid. I always had a good curveball, and it was just like fastball curveball. And I was just like, new pitch, here goes. And it was legit scary. I was like waiting for it to come back to my face.
Well, like the first time you put a Mentos in a Pepsi.
Yeah. A lot of our conversation, guys, this is scouting as well. It goes back to it's uncomfortable to be exposed in certain ways. Mm-hmm. Like, if you're a scouting director and you draft a guy that's 88, 91 and he gets banged in A-ball, like, that's a rough look. If you draft a guy that's 95, 98 and he gets smashed in A-ball, that's, hey, who could have thunk it? Like, the guy can't get anybody out.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing for our guys. Like, guys don't, a lot of times, Bobby, you're exactly right. Guys don't want to get beat trying to pitch certain ways. They want to, if they want to get beat, it's, hey, look, I'm just going to try and throw it by this guy. And, that's kind of what's worked for me in my career. And, I'm kind of going to live and die with that. And that's where, my job as a coach comes in, is you got to get them to buy into a certain identity, and not everybody's identity could be the same. We have certain guys where it's like, hey, you're going to try and be an outlier stuff guy. You've got like a ton of carry. We're going to throw a ton of fastballs. We're going to make them as fast as possible, and see if we can get guys swing underneath the ball. And most guys can't do that. That's the nature of being an outlier. Most people aren't outliers.
Yeah.
So
I like what you said earlier, that I'm exactly right. I appreciate that.
Yeah. You're ready for politics, my man. The affirmation.
I need a bunch of yes men next to me. You're in.
Yeah. So that's I think that's a really big part of it. Like I said, I don't have all this stuff, completely hammered down. I don't think anybody does, but those are the kind of things that I think about when we're talking about trying to, get guys to really just to execute pitches, and just how important that is for so many guys to be successful at our level, and how emphasized it is on their way to our level, Right. And I didn't spend time in Pro Bowl, but I'm sure it's the same as you move up the chain, and even within Pro Ball, like the things that made you successful to get access to the next level won't necessarily make you a success once you get there. And that's a kind of a big part of the art of pitching and the art of coaching.
Yeah. Well, Liam, this was a great talk. I appreciate you coming back on the show. I mean, like you said, I think we covered a lot of the different avenues from command, because no one really does have an answer. And I think it's been like, oh, we got to put these fancy targets in the bullpen. We got to do this. We got to do that. But there really does seem to be something intangible, and I think you hit a lot of the different threads in that discussion really well. So, man, we just appreciate you coming back on. You have a lot of really good insight, and man, college baseball is coming back in whatever form. So I'm excited for you guys. What are you looking forward? What are you looking forward to most? What one thing in this fall? Is it hitting a fungo? Is it just
batting practice?
Yeah, sure. Actually, we take it off the machine a lot now, because my velo is not quite NCAA D1 game speed these days, but just being with our guys on the field and getting to do the work, is that one's easy. Like, being with our pitchers while we're doing this stuff, and not just this was fun for me because I'm starved for this kind of deep talk on some of the concepts that we want to put into practice this fall. So it was helpful for me, but getting a chance to do it with a bunch of like talented, motivated people, like there's it's hard to replace that. So I'm excited that we get to do it again.
All right, Bob, you want to send us off?
Liam, appreciate you coming back on. We will see everybody on whatever episode we resume on the Morning Brushback. Thanks.